What would you do if the Duke who stole your reputation returned 1 year later asking you to save his family from ruin? After his brother's death, the Duke of Belgrave branded Marianne a greedy widow and gave her Rookhaven, heiressed property in his name. He expected the unpaid workers to drive her away. Instead, Marianne discovered that the worthless sheep produced rare silver fleece sought by royal tailors. Someone had been selling it abroad under another estate's seal. She restored the mill, doubled the workers' wages, and built a fortune no man controlled when Belgrave's ancestral home was auctioned to satisfy mysterious debts, and bought it. The Duke arrived at her new door, ready to surrender his title in exchange for his tenant's safety. Then the great hall clock struck 13, releasing a narrow strip of woven cloth hidden inside its mechanism. The pattern matched a code. Marianne's husband had taught her before his fatal carriage accident, but whose name had he woven into its final line? The punishment began before the mourners had removed their black gloves. And Marianne Wycliffe stood at the end of the Belgrave Library while the family solicitor opened her late husband's will. Lord Julian Wycliffe had left no children and almost no personal fortune. Buses, London accounts, and investment papers had already been absorbed into the dukedom under obligations Marianne had never been permitted to inspect. The solicitor therefore announced that the Duke of Belgrave had generously granted his brother's widow the use of Rookhaven for the remainder of her natural life. A low laugh escaped Lady Cecily, our aunt. Everyone in the room knew Rookhaven. Its sheep were said to be diseased, its mill roof had fallen in, and its workers had not received wages for 7 months. Wycliffe, Duke of Belgrave, watched Marianne without visible satisfaction that made the cruelty worse. "Rookhaven is not generosity," she said. "It is exile. Call it what you wish," I replied. "My brother spent beyond reason after marrying you. I will not permit Belgrave to finance the habits that killed him." Julian had died when his carriage overturned on the northern road, but the Duke spoke as if Marianne's silk gowns had broken the axle. She could have told him that Julian had become frightened in the final months of his life, had burned letters without reading them, and taught her a strange counting game using colored threads. She could have shown Adrian the last strip Julian had woven. 7 black crossings, then 4 black again. But grief had made the Duke hungry for a culprit, and every person in that library had already decided a merchant's daughter made a convenient one. Marianne removed the Belgrave emerald from her throat and placed it on the solicitor's desk. "Sell this and pay Rookhaven's workers." Adrian's expression shifted. "That belonged to my mother." "Then you should not have fastened it around the neck of a woman you despise." She left before anyone could see her hands trembling. Rookhaven lay 3 hours north of Belgrave Court. Beyond fields gradually stripped of hedges and villages where the cottages leaned beneath patched roofs. Marianne arrived near dusk with 1 maid, 2 trunks, and a receipt showing that the emerald had been sold for less than half its value. 43 workers were waiting outside the ruined mill. They did not welcome her. Their spokesman, a broad-shouldered foreman named Samuel Reed, placed 7 unpaid wage slips in her hand. "His Grace sent 3 agents before you," he said. "Each promised money, each counted the sheep, each left." "How many sheep?" Marianne asked. 412. The estate inventory listed 186. That was the first lie. The second waited inside the shearing shed. A mound of grey fleece lay beneath torn canvas, dismissed in the inventory as coarse waste. Marianne lifted 1 lock toward the fading light. Outer fibers were dirty, but beneath them gleamed a pale, metallic softness she recognized instantly. Her father had imported Spanish merino and Saxon wool before respectable society decided his knowledge embarrassed his titled daughter. Ice was finer than either. Properly washed, carded, and woven, it could command a price high enough to pay every worker twice. "Who buys your best wool?" she asked. Samuel's face closed. "My best wool." Marianne crossed to the sorting table. Knife marks scarred its edge at regular intervals. 7 cuts, a space 2 cuts, another space 4. The same sequence Julian had woven before his death. I opened the old dispatch book and found 12 years of empty pages. Yet fresh lanolin darkened the binding, and a smear of blue sealing wax marked the final sheet. Rookhaven used red wax. Blue belonged to Harrogate, the wealthy estate managed by Sir Oswald Crane, Belgrave's financial advisor. Outside, a cart rattled away behind the northern wall. Marianne reached the yard in time to see it vanish toward the Harrogate road, carrying 6 covered bales. Every bale bore a clipped black corner the Mark Samuel had claimed no longer existed. And Rookhaven was not worthless. Someone had made it appear worthless, and Julian had died trying to teach her how to count what had been stolen. Marianne did not accuse Samuel. A frightened man would deny what a secure man might explain. So she paid each worker 1 week's wages from the emerald money and promised the remainder only after she had inspected every building. The gesture cost nearly all the cash she possessed. By sunrise, 12 workers had returned. Samuel unlocked the mill himself. Its roof had failed over the eastern carding room, not the machinery. 2 looms remained sound beneath oilcloth. The fulling drums needed new leather belts, and the water wheel had been disconnected rather than broken. Marianne found the missing iron pins stacked neatly in the estate office. It was disorderly. Rookhaven's ruin had been arranged. Her first ally was Ruth Fenwick, an elderly dyer whose hands were permanently stained blue from woad. Ruth had worked at Rookhaven before Sir Oswald centralized Belgrave's wool trade at Harrogate. She confirmed that the silver fleece came from a hardy local flock bred by Marianne's husband. Julian had believed it could win a royal uniform contract. 3 years earlier, Oswald's agents ordered the finest animals moved at night, but Samuel and the shepherds hid more than 200 in the upper fields. Uncas lied about the wool because men who told the truth lost their cottages. Why did Julian not tell the Duke? Marianne asked. Ruth looked toward the silent looms. He tried. His letters returned unopened. Marianne wrote to her father's former buyer in London, Mrs. Eliza Bexley, enclosing a washed sample without naming its source. Mrs. Bexley replied that the fiber was extraordinary and offered a price 4 times higher than ordinary English wool, provided Marianne could deliver cloth of consistent weight that required a working mill. Marianne sold her carriage, moved into 2 rooms above the counting house, and hired Thomas Pell, a millwright dismissed from Harrogate after questioning its weights. She negotiated timber on credit, offered workers a share of the first finished order, and spent each morning sorting fleece beside them so no one could claim she understood only paper. Her knowledge had a clear origin. As a girl, she had stood on wool bales while her father taught her to judge crimp, staple, grease, and strength with closed eyes. Society had called those lessons unsuitable. At Rookhaven, came survival. Within 10 weeks, the water wheel turned. Within 12, the first silver cloth came from the loom. Marianne did not send it under Rookhaven's ordinary seal. She stitched a single strand of madder red silk into the inner selvage, a mark invisible once the cloth was folded, but impossible to add after weaving. Mrs. Bexley purchased the entire bolt and placed an order from a royal tailor. Rookhaven paid its arrears before Christmas. Marianne doubled wages after the second contract, not from sentiment, but because skilled hands were the estate's most valuable machinery. The workers stopped calling her Lady Wycliffe and began calling her Lady Marianne, a small change that meant more than any formal courtesy. Trouble arrived in a polished black carriage. Sir Oswald Crane stepped into the mill wearing gloves too pale for an industrial yard. He was 50, handsome in the careful manner of a man who treated appearance as evidence of virtue. Congratulated Marianne, then informed her that every sheep at Rookhaven belonged to Belgrave and that any independent sale constituted theft. She showed him the life interest deed Adrian had granted, and the land, stock, fixtures, and income to her use. Oswald's pleasant expression thinned. His Grace did not understand the value of what he conveyed. Neither did you, apparently. His eyes moved to the silver cloth. Women who rise too quickly are often blamed for the height from which they fall. That afternoon, he ordered every Belgrave merchant to refuse Rookhaven shipments. And Marianne responded by contracting directly with independent carriers. She numbered each bale, recorded its exact weight in 3 books, and gave sealed copies to Samuel, Ruth, and March, a county solicitor who had known her father. She also began decoding Julian S. thread sequences. He had taught her that black-marked consonants, silver-marked vowels. That's divided words, but the strip she possessed was incomplete. 724 was not a name, it was an instruction without its object. And Adrian came to Rookhaven in January after Oswald reported that Marianne had stolen livestock worth £5,000. The Duke expected desperation and found a repaired roof, cottages, and a mill working before dawn. Marianne met him at the sorting table with grease on her sleeve. His gaze paused on her capable hands before returning to formality. And Sir Oswald says the hidden flock proves deliberate theft. The flock was hidden from Sir Oswald, not from Belgrave. Your own inventory lost 226 sheep, while continuing to charge their winter feed to Rookhaven. Right. She placed the contradictory accounts before him. Adrian read them, then asked precise questions that revealed intelligence long insulated from honest information. He examined the animals. I spoke privately with shepherds, and discovered that Oswald official totals could not be true. Yet when Marianne asked him to suspend his advisor, he refused. Oswald served my father. Irons are not proof. Your brother is dead. Your workers were hungry. Your accounts contradict the land in front of you. How much more must happen before doubt becomes responsibility? I flinched. He ordered an audit, but left Oswald in control of the books. It was an insufficient decision, and Marianne told him so. Still, he remained at Rookhaven for 3 days to observe the count. He ate with the workers because there was no formal dining room fit for use. He saw Marianne settle disputes, reject inferior dye, and carry broth to Thomas Pell when the millwright injured his hand. Entered his face reluctantly, followed by shame. On the final evening, he admitted that Julian's death had broken something he had mistaken for judgment. I believed if you spent his money because Oswald showed me Account Julian's signature. Did you ever ask me? No. Then your grief explains the weapon. It does not excuse where you pointed it. Adrian accepted the rebuke without defending himself. It was the first useful thing he gave her. The audit never began. 2 customs officers arrived instead and opened a Rookhaven wagon bound for London. Licensed cloth, they found 6 bolts intended for export to France, where wartime restrictions made the shipment illegal. The papers bore Marianne's signature. She knew at once how the trap had been laid. Her independent carrier had been replaced at the northern toll gate, and the forged signature was copied from her contract with Mrs. Bexley. Oswald appeared with a magistrate before sunset. He expressed sorrow while presenting records that made Rookhaven look like the center of a smuggling operation. Samuel, fearing for his children, denied seeing the wagon loaded. London clerk could not be reached. Adrian arrived while officers sealed the mill. Marianne expected him to recognize Oswald's method. Instead, he looked at the papers, at her, and ordered the workers to cooperate. Until the hearing, production must cease. The words silenced the yard. Marianne understood that he believed restraint was fairness. Families whose wages depended on the mill, it was surrender. You have condemned people before establishing guilt, she said again. Adrian's face showed that he understood the accusation and reversed the order. That night, flames rose from the sealed carding room. The fire began in 3 separate places and raced along wool treated with lamp oil. The official watchman had disappeared. Marianne smelled the oil before she saw the flames and knew water alone would spread it across the floor. She ordered workers to smother the lower fire with wet, raw fleeces, while Thomas cut the drive belt to stop sparks reaching the weaving room. Samuel entered for the duplicate wage book and collapsed beneath a beam. Marianne tied a soaked shawl over her face, crawled through smoke, and dragged him toward the loading door until Adrian reached them. He had ridden back after discovering the customs papers, used a Belgrave watermark, discontinued before Marianne's marriage. He lifted the beam while she freed Samuel. Neither could have saved him alone. At dawn, half the mill was blackened, but every worker lived and the 2 looms survived. In the ashes, Marianne found a brass tally disc stamped H19. Harrogate used brass discs to track warehouse teams. Found 1 illegal bolt that had fallen clear of the hottest fire. Its inner selvage carried her madder red strand, but the end was sealed with Harrogate blue wax. The bolt proved Rookhaven cloth had entered Harrogate custody before being planted in her wagon. Adrian wanted to arrest Oswald. Marianne refused to move too soon. A tally disc could be stolen. Wax could be copied. They needed the commercial record connecting the marked cloth to Oswald's profit and the financial record connecting his scheme to Belgrave's debts. Adrian made his first costly choice that morning. The magistrate and 40 workers, he lifted the seal from the mill and declared that he, not Marianne, would answer any charge arising from resumed production. He removed Oswald as comptroller pending inquiry and gave Marianne access to Belgrave's ledgers. The decision exposed him to accusations of protecting his brother's widow and jeopardized his credit. Signed it publicly. Marianne did not forgive him. She did allow him to help. They worked in the Rookhaven counting house through 6 cold weeks. Marianne followed weights rather than money. Money could be renamed as fees, loans, or losses. Wool retained physical limits. Belgrave's records claimed Harrogate produced 900 bolts from enough fleece for 500. Material came from Rookhaven. Oswald sold the silver cloth abroad as Harrogate luxury wool, placed the profits in companies controlled by his nephews, then charged the dukedom for the supposed failure of Rookhaven. Julian had discovered the false weights. His fatal journey had been to meet a wheelwright, who examined his carriage and found a retaining pin filed almost through the wheelwright. Sven had vanished after the accident. Adrian sent trusted men to find him, while Marianne traced the madder thread. Mrs. Bexley testified that every marked bolt she bought came lawfully from Marianne. A royal tailor produced a coat lining containing the same thread. Then an Antwerp merchant sent an invoice for 12 silver bolts, bought from Harrogate months before Marianne reopened the mill. Hines established theft, but Oswald struck back through debt. He produced bonds signed by Adrian pledging Belgrave Court against enormous loans. Adrian recognized his signature. For years he had signed blank authorizations to avoid the details his father had taught him were beneath a duke. Oswald had filled them later, routed imaginary loans through friendly banks, and scheduled foreclosure before the royal wool contract could restore Belgrave's finances. The ancestral house would be auctioned in 1 month. Adrian could preserve his title by blaming Marianne for manipulating him and accepting Oswald's offer to settle the debts in exchange for Rookhaven. He refused at the creditors' meeting. He stated that Marianne had acted independently, that he had wrongfully exiled her, and that every accusation he made after Julian's death lacked evidence. The confession destroyed the respectable fiction on which his authority rested. Several peers left without speaking to him. "You may lose Belgrave Court," Marianne said afterward. "I may deserve to. Your tenants do not. That distinction changed their plan." Marianne secured the royal contract using Rookhaven's verified production. Mrs. Bexley organized a consortium of textile buyers willing to advance payment. The workers agreed to invest part of their profit shares. Mr. March registered a company controlled solely by Marianne. Protecting it from Belgrave's creditors, she would bid at the auction, not to restore Adrian's privilege, but to keep the farms intact and prevent Oswald from evicting families to sell the land in pieces. Adrian gave her every tenant schedule and boundary record. In doing so, he gave another person the means to own what his family had held for 3 centuries. Their closeness grew in the spaces where neither demanded it. Ask rather than command. She saw him spend nights preparing fair leases for people who might soon cease to be his tenants. He spoke of Julian without using grief as a shield. She told him she had loved Julian kindly, but had never been loved courageously. Their marriage had become companionship shaped by fear. Adrian did not turn that confession into permission. transaction finally stood unmistakably between them, he stepped back. "Not while you must depend on my testimony," he said. It was restraint, not rejection, and Marianne trusted him more for it. Before the auction, Elias Venn was found alive in a coastal workhouse. He admitted Oswald paid him to replace the carriage pin after Julian S.'s death, making the damage appear accidental. Elias had refused to file the original pin. Another man did it. Elias had kept the damaged pin and a receipt signed by Oswald's clerk because fear made him cowardly but not careless. It implicated the office, not Oswald personally. Julian S. woven message remained the missing link. Marianne laid the strip beside production tallies and noticed the groups were not 724 but 7 hours. 24 loom workers used 24 to mean a full day. Julian S.'s instruction was 7 after 24, the 7th mechanism after midnight. Belgrave Quartet's great clock had 7 cams controlling its chimes. Stood inside the property Oswald expected to purchase. On auction morning, rain darkened the stone of Belgrave Court. Creditors, tenants, reporters, and county officials filled the great hall. Oswald bid through a London banker. Marianne entered only after the price had driven away lesser buyers. Her first bid produced laughter from nobles who remembered the merchant's daughter they had mocked at Julian S.'s funeral and silenced them. She presented the royal contract as security and bid the exact amount of the disputed debt. Oswald Banker exceeded it by £100. Marianne added the value of her next season's confirmed delivery. The banker looked toward Oswald, received no signal, and withdrew. The hammer fell. 1 year after Adrian gave Marianne the poorest property in his name, she became the legal owner of his ancestral home. Adrian stood beneath the portraits of his family and bowed to her before everyone. "Belgrave Court is yours." Oswald immediately demanded that the house be cleared for inspection. Marianne's funds came from smuggling. Officers moved toward the account chests, then the great hall clock began striking noon. Marianne watched the 7th cam through the open maintenance panel Elias had described. Our stroke sounded. She reached behind the pendulum and pulled a narrow lever wrapped in faded silver thread. A 13th stroke shook the hall. A compartment beneath the clock face opened, a woven strip no wider than a ribbon. Julian had hidden it where the mechanism's vibration would preserve it from damp, and where only his code revealed the release. And the pattern contained names encoded through alternating black and silver threads. Marianne read it using the system Julian taught her, and then handed it to Ruth Fenwick, who independently confirmed the sequence. Final line named Oswald Crane. It recorded the Harrogate warehouse numbers, the false loan dates, and the order to alter the north carriage axle. Oswald laughed and called it a Widow S. invention. Marianne had anticipated that defense. The strip used silver yarn spun before Julian's death and dyed with a discontinued Rookhaven mordant Ruth could identify more decisively. Julian had woven sections of a printed customs receipts, cut into narrow supports. When the strip was held to the window, the paper beneath displayed Oswald's own shipment numbers and the watermark of his Antwerp company. Those numbers matched invoices already obtained from abroad. He had not merely been named by a dead man. His private commercial records had been physically woven into the accusation before the carriage accident. Oswald tried to claim Julian had forged them. Marianne placed the marked illegal bolt on the auction table, opened its selvage to reveal her madder thread, and broke the blue Harrogate seal in front of the customs officers. She then laid out the chain. Samuel and Ruth witnessed Rookhaven production. Her 3 duplicate books fixed the weights. Mrs. Bexley authenticated legitimate sales. Antwerp invoice proved Harrogate sold silver cloth before Rookhaven officially reopened. H19 linked the arson team to Oswald's warehouse. The discontinued Belgrave watermark proved the smuggling license came from old paper under his control. Elias' pin and receipt connected his clerk to Julian's death, and the clock strip contained shipment numbers only the controller of Oswald's foreign companies could know, and his plan depended on everyone treating wool as an interchangeable commodity and Marianne as an ignorant widow. His contempt had preserved the differences that convicted him. The magistrate ordered his arrest for fraud, arson, conspiracy, smuggling, and Julian S. murder. His banker surrendered correspondence, showing Oswald intended to divide Belgrave farms after the auction and evict more than 80 tenant families. Riots were later voided, but the auction could not simply be undone because Marianne's purchase had lawfully paid innocent creditors. Belgrave Court remained hers. She used recovered funds from Oswald's companies to compensate workers and tenants first. Adrian's title survived, but he no longer owned the house beneath it. That evening, after officials departed, he came to Marianne's new door, carrying a signed petition offering to place the management of all remaining Belgrave lands under an independent trust, if surrendering my authority protects the tenants. He said. Marianne, read every page. You once gave me Rookhaven because you believed it worthless. Now you offer Belgrave because you finally understand its value. Control, not responsibility. Responsibility remains mine. She did not accept his sacrifice as a grand gesture. She revised it. The trust would include elected tenant representatives, accounts, fair leases, and a prohibition against blank authorizations. Adrian would remain duke and work under the same rules as everyone else. He signed her version. Public correction required more than private remorse. So he repeated his apology at the next county assembly, named his specific failures, restored Marianne's reputation, and credited her with saving the estates. Months passed before she allowed the question of love to enter the room. Adrian lived in the East Steward's cottage and paid rent to Belgrave Court. He attended mill meetings, learned woolgrades from Samuel, and never claimed credit for Marianne's decisions. Expanded without becoming cruel. Workers retained their shares, and Ruth trained young women as dyers and accountants. Marianne established a school teaching estate arithmetic to daughters as well as sons. Anniversary of the auction, she found Adrian in the Great Hall, repairing the clock case where Oswald's men had damaged it. You are a poor carpenter, she observed. I am improving under severe supervision. Who's yours whenever I am fortunate? He did not kneel. He did not offer land that belonged to her or protection she no longer needed. He asked whether she would consider building a marriage with separate property, authority, and the right to refuse him whenever conscience required it. Marianne looked at the clock, the loom strip framed beneath it, and the man who had once used grief to condemn her but had since paid the cost of becoming honest. And, she said, provided Belgrave Court continues, charging you rent until the wedding. His laugh was quiet and astonished. The first time Marianne crossed that hall, society had treated her as a merchant's daughter, lucky to enter a noble family. Now every account in the house carried her authorization, every tenant knew the terms protecting them, and the Duke waited for her choice. At noon, the clock struck 12 clean notes. I struck 13 again. It did not need to. What had been hidden had spoken. What had been stolen had been restored, and the woman sent away with a worthless estate had returned not to beg for a place in the ducal world. Whether he had earned one in hers.